Hello. Welcome to File Exchange, and I'm one of your hosts, Colette Robbins, and then this is Sophie Kahn above me here. And we started File Exchange after countless Zoom calls in 2020, where we chatted with 3D artists, writers, and curators, and we decided that those conversations should be recorded and shared in a podcast-style YouTube channel. As hybrid digital analog sculptors, we built a channel to provide a context and a space for a literal and conceptual exchange of files. Each episode features a different artist, curator, or writer who has a focus in 3D art. This channel allows you to be a fly on the wall as we share philosophies, tools, and tips revolving around these 21st century tools in art. And today, our guest is Filippo Lorenzin, and Sophie is going to introduce him more properly.
Yeah, welcome, Filippo. So just briefly, Filippo Lorenzin is an independent art writer, teacher, media theorist based in Venice, works as Artistic Director of MOCDA, the Museum of Contemporary Digital Art. Filippo has 10 years experience, over 10 years in fields of contemporary art and digital culture, working with the Goethe Institute, Paris College of Art, Arebyte, and the V&A in London. And he writes about media art, digital culture, and art history for outlets, including Hyperallergic, often with articles touching on the contemporary art historical grounding and roots of digital art and trends. So yes, welcome, Filippo. We're excited to talk to you today.
Likewise. Thank you, Colette. Thank you, Sophie. I'm very happy to be here with you. And, I just look forward talking about digital art, digital culture, and, everything staying, in between these two with you in the next 60, 70 minutes.
Nice. Yes.
Yeah. So with that said, we'd love to hear about a couple of recent projects or what's been on your mind recently, anything that you would like to share. We're curious to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I can tell you that I've been quite busy in the past few months in the role of Artistic Director of MOCDA. Basically, I've been working with MOCDA for over 2 years now. Actually, I started working with MOCDA in October 2020, so literally the week after I moved to Italy. I worked for 1.5 years as a curator, as a writer, sometimes as a lecturer, and finally, in February 2022, I took the position full time. And I can tell you it has been a very intense, but also interesting, but also entertaining experience, because, there are so many things going on right now that, sometimes it feels like that you have to think about what's going to happen like in 5 months in order not to be relevant, but, in order to be able to provide helpful directions and information to your public.
Absolutely.
That's the tricky thing about, not tricky, yes, tricky, but also interesting things about, digital art in general, but also I would say about digital culture in general, isn't it? You always have to be, you always have to read like the latest article, you always have to read the latest tweet.
It's very fast changing, right? And it feels without...
As are the tools and the accessibility to the tools that artists are able to use now. And, things are getting, the work is changing because of that.
Absolutely.
So that's also something you have to keep up on as well.
Absolutely. I always say that, there is a reason why, for example, I remember that back in late 2020, when the NFTs phenomenon, was starting, to become very relevant, at least, in terms of market, I suppose. I remember that most of the conversation I could find, about this subject was on Twitter. I couldn't find anybody talking about that on Facebook, which was quite interesting for me because, as you can imagine, most of my contacts on Facebook were, digital artists. I mean, technically not digital artists working with digital tools, curators, studying digital art and so on. So, I mean, people that have been studying, digital culture and digital art for over even 30 years. But for a reason or another, literally nobody talked about this phenomenon. And I think that it's mostly because, Twitter is designed, to allow people to share, updates in a much different way than Facebook.
Absolutely.
Which I believe is actually a problem for for art historians in a way. What I'm talking about is that something I noticed in the past 1 year and a half, 2 years, is that because Twitter doesn't allow you to write more than how many 240 characters or something like that. That's actually a very good excuse for people that don't have much to say, if you know what I mean. I mean, of course, on the one hand, it's amazing because, it allows you, to just say literally two things like, hi, my name is something and I made this.
Yeah,
but on the other
whatever's
hand,
on your mind in that second without a whole lot of depth and context to it.
Exactly. But that means that basically, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everybody using Twitter is like brain dead, especially because I've been using Twitter a lot.
So that will be... It's like the platform frames the conversation.
Well, I think also the threads are where the kind of stories get told on Twitter, and that's something I've discovered. And I do actually, I like the kind of nesting ability of the thread option where you can you can post it. Like I have like multiple threads going at once. Like if I have a new piece that I'm making, I like to kind of show the story of all the components. And that's a good format with Twitter. But with the writing, I think it's a little more difficult. I mean, you can kind of write out a thread, but I think it does make it difficult for a more in-depth writing. But it's an interesting challenge. It's been an interesting promotional and like marketing tool and connecting tool to communities, but it has its drawbacks, just like Instagram does too, because Instagram feels more static in some ways.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, but I would say that both Instagram and Facebook share the same issue. The algorithm, the way their algorithms work, basically. I mean, I suppose there is a reason why Twitter is so successful, in the so-called crypto culture scene. That's mostly because, the algorithm works in a much more dynamic way. While, like on Facebook, it can happen that you post something and people will see your update like 2 days after or 4 days after.
Yeah, it's not this kind of real-time like fire hose of information that is streaming. Yeah.
And that, for an artist, it's like, but not only for an artist. I mean, it's like for anybody who wants to communicate what they want to communicate, that's a very big problem, especially, in such a fast-paced environment. And, this means that you have, you have this generation. And when I say generation, I don't mean, like people that share the same age. I'm talking about like a generation of artists and creatives and, just people that are curious about art and design and creativity that are growing, that are, taking their first steps in this world like now. And they are just getting used to the fact that, it's not really necessary to say more than 240 characters. So that's why I hope, I believe that what we try to do at MOCDA is, important, because we try, for example, last night we hosted a special curatorial tour of a group show we opened in the Central End, which is a metaverse. And at the same time, we presented the catalog, because every single time we open an exhibition in the Central End, we publish a physical copy of the catalog.
That's great. Because, I love that.
because, you know, for example, when I used to teach history of new media art at the Paris College of Art, every single time I reached the point where when, you know, I wanted to talk about net art projects. So let's say, you know, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s works. Every single time I had, you know, this very long list of links, and, you know, I shared this list with my students, and I always ask, okay, now please check all these links and tell me how many of these, which are, you know, the original links, how many of these are still active. And of course, you know, out of, I don't know, 30, maybe 1 or 2 were still working, which is actually a very big problem from, you know, from an historical perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and, you know, it's not just about, you know, printing lovely catalogs, but it's also a very good, we hope, it's a very good opportunity for artists that more often than not don't have many opportunities to talk about what they do, you know, for, you know, for more than like 5 minutes, or, you know, for like, I don't know, maybe for a 10 minutes interview to, you know, to explain what they do, you know, to engage in a sort of critical conversation rather than, you know, rather than saying, you know, hi, I just made this work, please.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you share images from this catalog?
I can certainly do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great.
Absolutely.
We'd love to see it now that because it's called Do Not Touch, right?
That's very correct. Yes.
Yeah.
With
and Martina,
by the way,
Martina Menegon. Yes. Sorry.
I'm so sorry I missed the opening. I had another conflict. I'm sad that I couldn't get to join.
Fair enough. We recorded the event. Something we do every single time we host public events is to record them. So, you know, so you will,
everybody can experience them in their own time zones.
Otherwise, yes, that's actually a very tricky aspect, because maybe we will talk about this later. We try to, you know, to make our events and project as accessible as possible, not only, you know, to the ones living in Europe, Africa, and America. We are trying our best to include, you know, our public from India, from China, from Japan, from South Korea. Now, let me share my screen very quickly. And when I say very quickly, of course, it will depend on my computer. Because as always, technology is amazing when it works.
Yeah.
Yes. It's working.
We're very familiar. Yes, this is great. I can see. Thank you.
We can see the PDF.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm just... So...
And it's a subject we're really interested in too, this idea of tactility and technology, and, you know, artists using these kind of super advanced tools, but then talking about tactility. I mean, we do know Sasha Katz's work and obviously Martina's work. And so this is very interesting, and it's something that's come up in previous File Exchange episodes about that.
Natasha Chuk, which was a recent one. She's a writer, theorist, and teacher at SVA, and we talked a lot about that. She's also written about VR and tactility, and on a screen and tactility. So it's been a recurring theme, I feel, in a lot of our conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the interesting thing about this exhibition, well, just to let you know, technically, as artistic director, you know, I just followed the whole process. This exhibition was in fact curated by Marie Chatel, who is one of a, I mean, it feels wrong to say, you know, one of the best MOCDA curators, because everybody are the best, but, you know, she's very good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it has been quite something, because it took, how many months it took? So we started talking about this exhibition in September 2021, and it opened in early April 2022. I mean, last April, basically. Which is something that is, you know, it's a fact that more often than not make people very surprised, because people tend to, I mean, not people, but, you know, whenever we talk about how we host our exhibitions in the Central End or Arium or Sandbox, more often than not, our public, you know, sometimes art students, sometimes people that are, you know, very interested in technology, there is this sort of, they tend to think that simply because it's online, it takes much less time to
I mean, I think there's that assumption, like Colette and I deal with this all the time working in 3D.
I'm sure.
People think it's magic. They think the machines just spit it out. And there's this total, I think if you're not familiar with the enormous amount of human labor that goes into any digital work, there's just this assumption that it's sort of somehow created by the machine without anybody driving it. Yeah, we know that.
Yes.
I would say that to a certain degree, I mean, it's not, I don't want to say it's like more difficult than, opening an exhibition in a physical space, but let's say that it has its own difficulties.
Challenges.
Yes. And, I would say that at the end of the day, the physical space has its own opportunity, offers, its own opportunities and limitations in the same way that, the virtual space offers its own opportunities and limitations. So to be honest with you, we consider with the artist whether it makes sense to present their works like in a physical space or a virtual space before starting working on the actual exhibition. Because, we tend to think that not necessarily, I mean, when you have a digital work, I don't know, like a video or a picture or a 3D model or, I don't know, an audio installation, a virtual performance act, why not? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be on display on a screen.
Right. I think that's really important to talk about because I think that's a misconception.
Absolutely. So let me show you something. So this is the catalog of liminal territories.
Oh, yes.
Which is, I'm glad you know it.
Aria was in it, Aria Harvey. And
I thought that was when I might have first reached out to you, actually, because I know Aria well, and I had seen that she was in this show and was really curious to learn more about it. I'm sorry that I couldn't see this in person. This was in Paris, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes. It has been on for a month and a half in these beautiful galleries, the PAL project, which is this project led by two very young brothers. And it's, it was, again, a very French and intense experience. And I just, honestly, it's always, I don't know if it ever happened to you. I'm sure it happened, but it's always fun for me to read my own words, translated like in French. Or in Spanish or in any other languages. So I just want to show you something very quickly. Okay, so these are the exhibition views, but what I'm looking for in particular, let's see if I can find it very quickly. Okay, so basically, I don't know if you know the work of Elena Sarin. Basically, she makes this.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Zoetropes? Are they zoetropes?
Say it again.
Is it a zoetrope?
Yes. So basically, she usually makes looped GIF animations. Okay, she makes with in collaboration with AI. So we basically the very first thing I asked the artist I got in contact with for this exhibition was, okay, I know this exhibition is going to be pretty much about digital art, but I want to have as less monitors and screens as possible because otherwise,
I love that.
Especially now, I mean, I suppose it would make sense if we were living, like in the early 90s or like 20 years ago, where, to see screens in a gallery would have probably be like a sort of surprise. But now, we literally live with a screen in front of our eyes like 24/7.
Saturated with it,
it's like the perfect way to make people uninterested in the works on display, because at that point, yes, you could think, even if it's like a brand new work made specifically for an exhibition, the first thing you think when you see a work on a screen is, so was it really mandatory to come here and see the work on display? Couldn't I just see it on my computer?
Exactly. Then there's no kind of physical encounter with the art.
Exactly. So So in this case, you know, we went back and forth with Elena, and at the end, you know, I thought, you know what, let's try to do something more physical, and you know, we were able to build this zoetrope, and basically she printed these stripes, and basically the visitors were able, you know, to see the work animated by using the zoetrope. It was actually quite fun, and you know,
that's great.
At the end of the day, the work didn't lose anything. Actually, probably it added something to the work, because at that point, you know, it was about also the history of animation. It wasn't just about, you know, seeing the work animated.
Can you show us an installation shot again?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to see it in situ too.
You can see Carla's work.
Carla and Aria on the left.
Yeah.
We have Aurea here. We have Luna Ikuta here. She's an amazing.
I also love that you used like antiquated like computers and like. Well, I just think there's so many opportunities with screens to do interesting things.
Absolutely.
When you instead of just like a flat screen or you know, it's like it's such a cool medium, but I feel like, you know, you don't see that a lot, that kind of play with the actual physicality.
Definitely not. In this specific case, I mean, there was a reason why we had this screen, you know, this sort of old screen. That was because the work on display was made specifically to be on display, you know, I mean, we tried to put it on display on, you know, like on a modern screen, and of course it wasn't the same. I mean, it was designed to work with the technology of those old screens, and you have no idea how difficult it was actually, you know, it has been quite difficult to find one of those screens still working. We had to ask the local library, of course.
Oh, wow, okay.
That was a work by Robbie Barrett, by the way.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful work.
This is a great show.
Yeah, no, that was quite a fun project. So yeah, I mean, generally speaking, you know, both in this case, but in many other projects created with MOCDA, the idea is to not, you know, fetishize the screen. And, you know, and also, you know, it's also, I think it's also a very good system. It's also a good strategy to, you know, to ask the artist to, you know, to consider the many natures of their work. Okay, so maybe the work doesn't necessarily have to be, again, like a looped GIF animation on a screen. Maybe it can become a sculpture. Maybe it can become a performance act. Maybe it can become, I don't know, a script. I mean, at the end of the day, I believe that when we talk about digital art, we mostly talk about translations. You know, we always talk about translations of data. We always talk about, you know, translations of information that become pictures or videos or, you know, audio files and so on. So I believe that that level of translation can be performed in real life as well. And also, you know, it makes everything just funnier, I suppose, both for the artist and for me.
Absolutely.
Does MOCDA have a physical space as well, or is it all?
So we are at the centralized museum, meaning that at the moment we do not have like a single physical space where to exhibit, for example, our permanent collection or the special exhibition. But that also means that we actually curated probably more IRL exhibitions than URL exhibitions in the past 2 years. Honestly, this is basically what usually happens. Maybe some museums or cultural platforms or, I don't know, other, you know, partners. Especially because of the NFTs craze, you know, they get in contact with us. They ask whether, you know, we would be available to, you know, to present, to talk about, you know, digital art and NFTs. And, more often than not, they have a space to do it, they have the money to do it, but more often than not, they don't have the actual art to present. So that's where, that's where we come in place, basically.
Yeah.
I think you're kind of like a liaison.
Great.
Yeah.
So you're able to have kind of floating partnerships
Absolutely.
and kind of pop-up shows, for want of a better term. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
No.
I mean, right now, for example, we have 5 works on display in Milan, London, and New York for the Urban Pixels project, which is a project developed in collaboration with Essilor Luxottica. Basically, what happened? Basically, they have at their disposal, as you can imagine, like super big screens placed in some of the busiest areas of, some of the most crowded cities in the world. And basically they started this new project where they want to use these screens to present art. So, we wanted to take this opportunity to present works that sometimes never had, I don't want to say the opportunity, but let's say that never had the chance to be on display in a physical, very public space.
Yeah.
So,
do you know Nina Colosi with the Streaming Museum?
Say this again?
Do you know Nina Colosi? She has an organization called the Streaming Museum. She's based in New York.
I'm afraid I don't.
Venture.
I believe I heard about the streaming museum.
Yeah, I'll put you in touch. It's
Okay.
interesting. There's a few ventures around that, around like using urban screens to present art.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Okay. Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm always, honestly, don't get me wrong. Of course, I like to curate exhibitions in, traditional, arty spaces.
Yeah.
But to be very honest with you, I tend to prefer to, to curate exhibitions in places that were not designed specifically to present art. And I believe that digital art has this unique feature of being, natively built to be on display wherever there is a screen or wherever, wherever you want, as long as you have a device to display it, which can be
it's adaptable. It's adaptable.
Yeah.
It is. So actually, it's quite fun. It's quite fun because of the Urban Pixels exhibition. We got in contact with quite a few, journalists and writers asking us, how does it feel, to present digital art in a public space? Do you think that people are finally ready to experience art on their way to work? And I was like, yes, of course, because they have been doing that for over 50 years now. I mean, the history of modern art has been always, at least, of the most interesting modern art, as more often than not been about artists trying to present, to challenge the line between art space and, non-artistic space. And I believe that especially now, especially because people are much more used to enjoy art, or let's say creative products, which sounds, very bad in this context, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I always remember that when I was in London, in Venice, it's not that, it doesn't happen that often, but in London, especially when you have to spend like 45 minutes in the tube, there is nothing much you can do. So of course, you just put your headphones and you watch like Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I never watched so many movies as in the 7 years
while you're commuting.
Especially silent movies, to be honest, because
interesting.
At that point, you don't really need the headphones to to watch those movies.
That's true. I know Colette watches like 3D software tutorials while commuting. Right. I'm working on doing that. Sometimes I need more concentration than I can like have in the subway.
I like it. It's like
Absolutely.
it's like a brainwashing for me, because it's like with software, it's like learning a new language and you have to like kind of learn it in every direction and kind of just
Right.
absorb, like,
Yes.
you know, so for me, it's just like another layer to kind of
It's like language
get me to remember it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know, I just tend to say that probably people are more, I mean, first of all, they have been already doing this for a long time, because, you know, it's not that digital art started, you know, like 2 years ago. It has been around for over 50 years now, and
Yeah.
artists have been making works specifically for social media and blogs, and, you know, and all the other channels for over 15 or even 20 years. So it's not like, you know, a brand new thing at the end of the day. But for me, it is surprising that, you know, like the big, you know, the general public is starting to talk about this now. So let me show you very quickly.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So this is Xcopy in London. This will be on display until the 10th of July. And this is, maybe this is better. This is Giuseppe Lo Schiavo with a new work that, this is Times Square.
Oh, my old studio, I used to be at the Elizabeth Foundation. That was my old like subway stop on this corner. They also do Midnight Moment there. There's a couple ventures using the Times Square screens. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, yes. This is on display for 3 minutes at 5 o'clock in the afternoon at 11 o'clock p.m. So if any of you is in London and want to go and have a look, be my guest.
We'll put it in our comments, because a lot of the people watching are going to be in New York. So yeah, we'll post
definitely.
Brilliant. Honestly, I prefer this video because you have, you know, the advertising on the top saying face the future, and underneath you have, yes, in this case, Giuseppe was inspired by, as you can imagine, by the, you know, the role of you know, of the market, and, you know, basically what we are doing to our planet, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, in that case, the idea was, you know, to present this work in one of the most advertised places in the planet, basically.
Well, but I also like that the artist considered that kind of corner screen and like the linear perspective. Like, and I know you've written an article about the connection between linear perspective and virtual reality, was it?
Yes, and screens in general, absolutely.
Yeah. And that one really kind of pushes that concept.
Yes, you were talking about, oh my gosh, it has been already 1 year.
First of March 2021. That was March. Yeah, I know.
I'm feeling so old now. So yes. Yeah. No, I mean, yes, I just love this. So yeah, let's say that, yeah, generally speaking, I always try to connect. I always try to explain what's happening now by using history, and not just art history, but also, you know, the history of society, the history of politics, the history of religions. Why not? And that's, you know, that's mostly probably because I'm Italian, and at the end of the day, my background is not really in art history, but, you know, even if I attended a school of fine art, and, you know, my course was a new technology for the arts. At the end of the day, you know, we always, especially, you know, while studying in Venice, you can't really, you know,
you can't escape history. It's there.
You can't really forget about, you know, art history and history in general. And
I can relate with that. I mean, I love looking to the past to talk about the future.
I mean, I suppose it really helps not only the, you know, the ones that are super interested in technology, because, you know, it allows them, you know, to have a broader view of what's going on right now, but it's also a very good strategy to allow you know, people interested in art history to understand more what's going on now. And I believe that it's always weird that, the general public tends to think that, contemporary art is, not just much weirder, but, let's say less understandable, less
accessible,
less understandable. Then I don't know, Renaissance, or or I don't know, the Impressionism and so on. For example, back in 2015, I was invited by a friend of mine to host a sort of lecture for his club. It was a club that had nothing to do with art history or art or contemporary art in general, but basically he was helping me when I was studying art at the university. And he is, of course, he's still alive, and he's also very successful. He studies geology. Okay, so basically the test was for me to explain contemporary art to someone that had no idea what contemporary art was, and at the same time he tried to explain geology to me. Unfortunately, I couldn't understand a single thing of what he said, but it seemed like he enjoyed what I said about contemporary art. Well, basically, long story short, I was invited to talk about Felix Gonzalez Torres, in front of a group of people that had no idea who Gonzalez Torres was, or even, anything past, I don't know, Impressionism, maybe. And basically, I spent like 1.5 hours talking about Gonzalez Torres, his works, why he made some things in certain ways. And at the very, very end, one of the crowd raised his hand and he said, I don't understand. I really don't understand, because, I feel that, I feel much closer to, let's say, Giotto, or I don't know, or to, to Michelangelo than, Gonzalez Torres. I don't really see why, I don't see the appeal of, of light bulbs, for example. And of course he was right, because of course, he had all the reasons to say that. But I told him, this is of course very interesting, because at the end of the day, Giotto lived like 700 years ago. So he lived in a much different time than ours.
Completely different culture, absolutely.
Absolutely. So what we see now, when we watch, when we see a Giotto's painting, we don't see the same thing he saw when he was making it. And I always use as example the fact that he used lapis lazuli to make the blue of the skies, which is not, the same. It's not like he didn't want to depict like a naturalistic sky. He used that blue because it was like the most expensive material available at the time. And of course, you have to use the most expensive material if you want to paint, where God was supposed to be.
The reason that those works were made too, the motive and the kind of the financial and political system that they existed in. Really quite different. Absolutely. That's so strange. This came up actually on Twitter recently. Like, it's a really recent sort of Twitter thread that I got into, where we're kind of talking about the fact that, for better or for worse, there are people who come into sort of art and tech, and there are people who come into the NFT space without an art historical education, without, having gone through the traditional systems. And in some ways, I think that's fantastic, because those systems are very elitist, they're very expensive. There's a lot of people that I've spoken to who are making NFT work who have sort of said, in the family that I grew up in, going to art school might have been like going to the moon. It just was not an option for us.
Totally understand that. Yes.
But there's a discourse that you get when you do go through those schools and have that education. And there can be, unfortunately, a bit of a danger that if you don't understand the mistakes of the past, you're doomed to repeat them. I think so. There's absolutely a role, more than ever, for a kind of understanding, grounding, context, framing, of digital
Absolutely.
work.
And also to keep in mind that like with the Giotto, we've had 700 years to talk about his work.
Exactly.
And like contextualize it and to create. So it's more that it's a known component, whereas like contemporary art is still unknown on the like in the masses and like and why and the impetus for making art. I mean, like so much about modern artists have been to be defying the previous generation's definition of what it means to be an artist.
Absolutely.
Like the very nature of being an artist seems to be defying that role. And so I think, you know, artists using NFTs as a vehicle to make their art has been another level of defiance. But I also think the importance of understanding what was before and the fact that the history of art is also the history of technology. And, you know, our humanity and who we are as humans has not really evolved in the past 20,000 years. So we are doing, so it's important to understand what those humans were doing artistically in different times to understand what we're doing with these tools.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. I mean, we touched so many interesting aspects in the last 30 seconds. So just to go back to the story, aside telling this person, you know, of course you are welcome to enjoy Giotto, but, you know, just take in consideration this and that. Of course, it wasn't just about that. I told him, you know, I think that, as you rightly said, you know, one of the best aspects of contemporary art is that it is made by contemporary people, meaning that the artists working now are using the same language and are probably are going through the same problems that you as a person living in 2022 you know, are experiencing, isn't it? And of course this is quite fun because I read this book about, you know, how things tend to become, you know, successful in popular culture, and there was a chapter about rock music, and he said, oh, you know, of course it's easy to say, oh, you know, this year, I don't know, Pink Floyd and I don't know, Led Zeppelin, you know, sold more than, you know, contemporary bands. That's, you know, because you spent the last 40 years telling everybody that's like the best music ever made. And it's also the same problem you have when you, for example, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Every single time you watch a movie set like in the 60s or in the 70s, they always put like the best music they made at that time. So it looks like that at the time, you know, you could hear only amazing music, but of course it wasn't that. It's
like the historical editing.
Absolutely.
No, that's a great point. So absolutely. As a heads up, we have about 10-15 minutes remaining. I would actually be really curious if you're able to screen share some images from the new exhibition or a tour, or I mean, look, up to you. However you want to use the.
And also, what is this? Not only 3D printers, an oblique. Wow.
This is something else I wanted to share very quickly.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, please.
Very, very quickly. I don't want to. So yeah, basically, this is the presentation of the workshops I hosted at the Paris College of Art. And basically, it was a very interesting experience because it is, at the end of the day, a very international college. More often than not, you have students that spend like 5-10 years working as tech experts, like at Apple or Facebook at the time. Now, I suppose Meta. And so on. And, you know, and more often than not, don't get me wrong, it's a very American thing at a certain point to say, you know what, now I want to go to Europe and learn something about specific aspects. So basically what happened, more often than not, these students knew everything about how to use certain tools, but didn't have much knowledge in, you know, art history or, you know, art theory. So at the end of the day, I was basically the one, you know, introducing them to, you know, to the joys and perils of art history. And in this case, it was specifically about how artists and, you know, creatives have been adopting new media since basically the cave paintings. In fact, the very first So the very first thing I used to talk about was the Lascaux cave, because you know, you have to take in consideration that Behance at the time was the only media we probably used.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, it finished with like the very latest digital art project I could find. And I mean, I believe that when we talk about new media and when we talk about digital, which are two different things, we always have to ensure that our public is aware of what it actually means, and that, you know, new media, it's a bit like saying, I suppose it's starting to feel a bit old, a bit like modern art. Like I don't know what you think, but for example, I wouldn't call art made like in the 60s modern. For me, modern is like, I don't know, from the, maybe from the early 20th century to, I don't know, maybe Jackson Pollock, or I mean,
like the 60s, like almost to the 50s, 60s. Yeah.
Exactly. So at this point, you know, new media is probably a term you can apply to certain things done until a certain point. But I don't really like.
So you don't like to, you know, put digital art and new media, like kind of make them the same. You like to make sure people understand that they're separate. Because I mean, yeah, it does seem to refer to the kind of branding done on artists making work more like in the 80s and 90s, 70s even, like.
Absolutely, yes. I suppose that the tricky thing about the using term new media is that it feels like it's only about digital tools, which for me, it's not technically true. I mean, media, you know, comes from media, meaning, you know, it's like whatever you use to make something, okay? So, you know, if you want, I mean, technically, you know, the body is your media. So technically, you know, that you could call your body as a sort of new media, because nobody used, you know, the body before the 60s, for example, to make
performance art. And
I know, again, I know that it is a sort of bold state, but you know,
that makes sense.
And you know, I always prefer to, you know, to make people say, he was probably wrong, but at least, you know, at least they had the opportunity to think about what I said instead of just repeating the same thing over and over.
But it's true. I mean, medium, it's not necessarily digital. I mean, that's just based on the definitions of the words. I mean, so it makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, to a degree, you know, the discovery of the discovery of oh my gosh, I forgot the term. The discovery of
camera obscura,
the linear perspective system.
A linear perspective system.
I mean, that was technically a new media at the time. Okay, they used certain tools in order to make it, but of course, you know, you don't really think about it as a sort of new media, meaning that it feels like that, you know, when you talk about new media art, it feels like you only have like pioneers always exploring, you know, brand new ways to use certain tools. And I'm totally okay with that, as long as we apply the same term in a more historical exception. And, you know, again, for example, Leonardo da Vinci for me was a new media artist at the end of the day, because the way he used his tools, and not just the physical tools, was, you know, very experimental. It wasn't just about, you know, because again, when you spend 5 centuries, you know, celebrating someone, at a certain point, you know, you may feel that they are not, I really hate the term revolutionary, but, you know, they were, you know, so bold at their time. But, you know, I suppose it's always a good opportunity to, you know, to make people reconsider what they know under a new.
Well, it's like saying technology is only related to digital things when that is absolutely not true. So when people say technology is bad, I'm like, well, are we talking about fire or like
cloud?
yeah, like where do we draw our line here?
Yeah.
Like what is our...
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about your shirt? Are you talking about your
like
shoes? Are you talking about your house? I mean, there are many.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, Sophie, to go back to your question. So what are we doing now? Yes, actually, we have very big plans for July. So we are going to open the MOCDA Digital Summer Show on the 9th of July in the Central End. It's a project that makes me very proud, honestly, because I've been talking about this project, and I've been collaborating with so many people for so many months now that I just look forward to the opening. Basically, what happens? It's a project that we developed in collaboration with 16 art schools and art universities from around the world.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, we got in contact with universities from Italy, from Austria, from Germany, from the UK, from Norway, from South Africa, from India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the US, Cuba. I'm very proud of Cuba. I was able to get in contact with the School of Fine Art of Cuba. And basically, we met, of course, only online. We met all these students, with the help of their teachers. And basically, we presented MOCDA and we presented the project. Basically, the students had a couple of months to submit up to 3 works. Then our curatorial team selected 30 works out of 250 submissions.
Wow.
But I will say that the best part starts like now, because the students that have been selected for the exhibition are invited to attend a series of online workshops, lectures, curatorial group sessions. With, not only with MOCDA, but also with curators that come from other museums, with teachers of other schools. And
that's amazing.
It's actually quite fun because, as a former art student, I always thought, I still think that, I mean, the idea of the art school is amazing because, it allows you to as a creative, to have a sort of protective environment, isn't it? Where you can experiment, where you can talk about what you do, and so on. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, you are always talking about your projects to people that know what you do, isn't it? Like your teacher, or
right.
I will just put a video so people will
fantastic.
see. This is actually the curatorial tour of maybe this one. This is the curatorial tour of Memento Minty, which was the first special exhibition we opened in the Central End in 2022. And basically, the summer show will take place on the same floor in the Central End in our building.
Okay.
Just so people will have something to see instead of just seeing my face. So yes, basically, what happens? You have this group of students that are, I don't want to say finally able, but that have the opportunity to present what they do to students that come from a totally different backgrounds. Because you can imagine, I don't know, even students that study in the same country, they don't necessarily share the same program. So it's quite interesting because you see some artists that maybe have been, that have been trained in how to use software, interact with artists that, that spend more time working on the concept of their work. Okay. And something we always wanted to do since the beginning was to involve not only those students that, that study digital art, but also those that study painting, sculpture, graphic design.
Fantastic. You have that like cross-pollination, that interdisciplinary conversations. That's great.
Exactly, because we believe that the central, not just the central, the metaverse in general is not just about digital art is not just about NFTs and the blockchain. I mean, of course, that's, you know, a big chapter of that book. But at the end of the day, for example, for the Decentraland, you don't need to mint your work in order to have it on display. In fact, none of the works on display at the summer show have been actually minted.
Okay.
And actually, you know, basically we want to show these students how difficult, but also how rewarding it is to present your work in a virtual environment where, you know, where almost everybody can go and see what you make.
I think that's a really good thing to push, is both the educational component of kind of, you know, bringing people from all different geographic regions. And I think that's one of the things that is, you know, really great about the NFT world, is that you kind of connecting with people all over the world, and then you can give feedback to each other and like get different types of educational styles all in one place, but also the art kind of interacting with each other is really amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to really bring that kind of ethos of decentralized, which isn't always, you know, really present in a lot of these kind of quote unquote decentralized worlds at all. But also I think it's interesting to think about that, because I went to an interdisciplinary grad program, and the reason being is that I did study as a traditional painter. So I didn't come from any software background. In fact, it was a much later start for me, but I liked the openness of the communities that were using that software, that it wasn't strange that I didn't come from that background. Whereas I think sometimes in the traditional art world, oh, you didn't go to this school, or you didn't go to that. Oh, you should just wait until you get into the best school, or you know, all of these parameters to kind of fit, you know, into the branding and the marketing. I think kind of breaking those down is having people jump from different, you know, mediums, so to speak, or different mindsets, or different, that kind of breaks those walls down. So I think that's really cool. That's one of your goals with this as well. And with,
you know, it's
MOCDA.
it's a community that is more often than not very welcoming, whether your goals, because, for example, you don't necessarily want to, you know, to have like a PhD in using a certain software, isn't it? Maybe you need just a certain amount of knowledge in using a certain software, and that's absolutely okay. Nobody's going to say, oh, but you know, you use that software in a sort of, not childish, but you know, in a sort of
right. If it works for the work, it doesn't matter. You know,
exactly, and that's something we. For example, it happened quite a few times in the past few months when we met the students for the summer show. For example, when I presented the project to the students of the School of Fine Arts in Venice, of course, you know, I physically went to the school, given it's like 10 minutes walk from here. And the teacher told me, just right before the presentation, he told me, look, just to let you know, out of these 120 something students, there are probably only 25 that study digital art. Okay, so just to let you know, you know, be aware of that. Fair enough. At the very end of the presentation, a few students raised their hands, and they all asked the same question, meaning, is it like very important to master a software in order to be a digital artist? And I was like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, as an artist, you should probably consider what you want to create.
Yeah, I think it depends on your goals.
I mean, yes, of course, it depends on the kind of
work you want to, what kind of output. Like, do you want it to be, if you want it to be in a certain way, you're going to have to learn a certain level. And if that doesn't matter, or if you're going to be outsourcing, you need to know enough so that you can know
what to ask for.
You need to know what to ask for, and you need to,
I feel like I made like the best kind of breakthroughs. Like, I laid the foundation for my practice when I knew next to nothing about 3D, and I jumped in. And, you know, it's not to say like the past 20 years, I haven't been kind of like refining that and honing that and kind of continually transitioning and, you know, learning new tools and stuff like that. But that kind of beginner's mind I talk about a lot. And I think in a way it's actually harder to come from a state of technical proficiency. And I know people who were like worked in the industry and then went to art school and actually really struggled with kind of doing things like wrong. I find it's easier as an artist to have that kind of back and forth with the material and like digital software resisting you in the way that like paint might resist you, clay, you know, that you don't need proficiency to get started.
Exactly.
No, and I'm with Sophie. When I got into it, I jumped in, you know, into the deep end of the pool without having any.
I'm not a manual reader.
Not a manual reader. But that being said, like I have a lot of respect for skills and for people who are technicians. And I do think they get a lot of like that people like what they learn and what they do does matter. And that time and that mastery does matter. And I think there's not a hierarchy, like somebody who doesn't use skills or does use skills are better. Like, I think that's important to clarify because I think there's this like, I think that's another misunderstanding about 3D in general, that it's like, again, like it's magic and like, you know, the people who use it, they maybe don't have like the brains of the people who are coming up with the ideas. And that's not necessarily true.
No, that's very untrue. No, it's interesting you say that because just the other day I read this book. It's by it's an Italian art historian, and basically at a certain point, it was a book written in the late 90s, and at a certain point I found it very, very challenging as a statement, honestly. She says, you know, there was like the very, very, very last chapter about digital art, and at a certain point she writes, you know, the current state of digital art is like it's like the paintings of the Renaissance weren't painted by Michelangelo, Raphael, or Leonardo, but they were painted by those that actually made the colors or actually, you know, created the materials. So basically, you know, of course, that was a very cutting edge, I suppose, statement.
So that's interesting. I'd love to see that book. Maybe we could do a follow-up afterwards. That's very interesting.
I can certainly check if it's available in English.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
I hate to cut us off. I think
I know.
We're an hour. I know. I feel like we could just talk.
I know we're going to have to continue this conversation, but maybe to end on, can you just kind of give us specific details about your current exhibition and your upcoming exhibition, like some final plugs that we can then include in the comments. Yeah,
absolutely. So, okay. So right now, MOCDA has how many exhibitions? 1, 2, 3 exhibitions on urban pixels, which again takes place, you know, in the physical spaces of, you know, of Milan, London, and New York. And again, you can find all the information on. Actually, you can find the information here on the website of MOCDA, and you can find where they are, which works are on display, when they are on display, and so on. Aside that, we have the Do Not Touch exhibition. We stay open until Sunday, the 2nd of July. By the way, just to let you know, there will be 2 special events taking place next Monday. So on the 20th and the 27th of June, there will be.
I'll try to get to those.
Okay. If it doesn't happen, fair enough. Both the events will be recorded, and our public will be able to, you know, to watch the recording.
It's fun to be there live, though. Yeah.
I lost an earbud.
What else? Yes, we also opened quite recently. Well, this is something I can show you very quickly. We just opened a new exhibition in Arium. By the way, if our public doesn't know what Arium is a metaverse, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what happens, every month we have an artist in residency program called The Foundry. Every month we select an artist, or as in this case, two artists. That's because they are a couple.
Mm-hmm. Entangled Others. Yeah, they're great. That's
yes, in this case, we worked with Entangled Others. They are amazing. Basically, every month they work with a curator and Arium, and basically they present a brand new series of works on display in a custom-made Arium space. And this is the one.
Oh, this looks
My
great.
computer is boiling, so probably you can't really see it.
Well, it's probably going a little slower, but like I think it looks really good. I like the lighting.
Yeah.
You got the gist of it. So
yeah.
But yeah, again, you can find all the links in MOCDA's website.
MOCDA's website. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Filippo. This was a really great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. This is, I know we could dig into so many more topics, and we're gonna have to also follow through sometime. Next time you're in New York, we can get some coffee and dig into these topics even more. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and for those watching, we always encourage people to make comments and to let us know ideas for other 3D artists they think we should bring on, or writers or curators. We're always open to our viewers input into that. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, everybody. And thank you for joining us, Filippo, and thank you, Sophie. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay.